Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar presentation today. My name is Curtis Garden. I'm with Oculus. I'm going to be hosting our presentation for today. What I'd like to do is just to spend a couple minutes with everyone, just familiarizing everyone with a little bit about Oculus. We'll spend just a couple minutes on that. And then I'm going to turn you guys over to Andrew Modlin, who's going to take you through some of his research work that he's been working on. So with that, just a few notes from us here at Oculus. So what is Oculus? Oculus is we're a Canadian-based company out of Toronto, Canada, and really what we focus on is the ability to visualize complex information for the purposes of doing analysis, the purposes of being able to understand and make decisions from data. Some of the different areas that Oculus focuses on, you can see the defense and intel space there. We have a number of projects in the finance space, as well as in the GIS space, so products like GeoTime, which we're going to take a look at today. Who are our customers? We deal primarily with these three different groups. Defense and intelligence was one that we touched upon. Public safety and law enforcement is another one we're seeing quite a lot of interest in, as well as the financial industry. Some of our friends and partners, I always like to say that you can tell a lot about an organization by the company that it keeps. And so these are some of our partners that we work with on a fairly frequent basis. Crisis Mappers, you'll know, is one that we work with a lot on these webinar series. We've done quite a lot of work with them over the past 3 or 4 years, helping to promote some of the work that they do around crisis mapping. Some of the work that we've done on our end, as I just mentioned there, the top left-hand corner is some of the work we've done with the Crisis Mappers Network. We also do a lot of research publications, so papers and projects that we've published, as well as participating in a number of events. We have the VAST competition down there in the bottom left-hand corner, where we've won a number of awards, which is the Visual Analytics Science and Technology Symposium. So just to kind of set the stage for some of the stuff that we're going to see today and as part of Andrew's presentation is really how do we look at and analyze movement data, whether that be an individual or an animal. And so the traditional way of looking at where things are is really to look at a map and to put dots down. So this is the location of an individual over a period of 2 years, and we can see all those purple dots represent a moment in time where this individual was. And that's great for knowing where they were, but what's really missing is the ability to be able to say, well, where is he moving? How is he moving? Was he moving fast? Was he moving slowly? Did he go back and forth? Were there any patterns? We can connect these dots together and we can start to see a bit of a pathway, at least, where the dots are connected and potentially what direction he was going, but we still don't have an understanding of the order, which would allow us to see things like movement, things like speed, and so forth. So what we proposed was kind of a novel solution to this, which is to add a timeline as the third dimension. And here we can see time is the vertical, and the data is essentially from the very top going down to the bottom towards the map. And so here we can see the location of this individual over a period of 2 years. And now we can see the order of all the trips he's made. We can count the number of trips. And if we wanted to dig right in there, we could even see how fast he's moving between all these different places. And this is going to allow us to learn a lot about behaviors, patterns, and trends, which can be very useful when looking at wildlife. And so this was a project that we started and eventually turned it into a product called GeoTime. A number of different uses for GeoTime. Obviously, we're going to take a look at today is a lot of GPS data that's been recorded by Andrew and his team. So that'll be very interesting to look at. We can also take a look at discrete data events. So in this case, crime incident reports. These can be anything that aren't necessarily movement, but have been reported over at a certain location over a period of time. Communication and transactions. This can be, where two animals get together and have a relationship, a link that joins them together. And with that, we can do kind of a social network analysis and understand the relationships between the two. That's all from me. I'm going to hand you guys over to Andrew, and he's going to walk you guys through his presentation. So with that, everyone, this is Andrew Modlin. He's a biologist with the USGS Western Ecological Research Centre, and he's been very gracious in bringing his presentation to us today. So with that, Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll get started.
Okay, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Today we're going to be looking at some of our recent research into the Mojave desert tortoise here in southern Nevada, Gophorus agassizii, and some of the work we've been doing to use GPS data loggers to get a better image of habitat use and movement across the landscape. So I'd also like to thank my contributors, Rich Inman, Ken Nussier, Todd Eskew, and Christina Drake. So if you didn't see it before in the picture here, we have the tortoise highlighted. They're very hard to see in the wild, even if they are out in the open. So the agenda for today's presentation, we're going to start off in PowerPoint, and I will go over a little bit of the information related to the species and familiarize you with the species we're studying. Next, we'll go into the purpose of our current study and the area where we're doing our research. Lastly, in PowerPoint, we'll go into the methods related to our GPS attachment and how we programmed our loggers to work in the field. From there, we'll switch over to GeoTime, and we'll look at some of the analysis we did on movement and behavior, and we'll show you a few examples. Moving on, we'll show you some examples of GPS errors that we identified, and we'll also look at some of the meetings and interactions in GeoTime as well. And then moving on, we'll get into some of the results that we gathered from this year, and we'll move on to some of the future implications of monitoring and conservation related to solar development. The desert tortoise is native to the Mojave and Sonoran deserts of the southwestern United States and northwest Mexico. The species was recently divided by the Colorado River to the northwest in California, southern Nevada, Utah, was designated, kept the species name Gophorus agassizii, and to the southeast into Arizona and northwest Mexico, that species was redesignated as Gophorus morafici. So desert tortoises are very, very slow-moving, and they're incredibly cryptic in the wild, very, very hard to find. They're an herbivore, and they're also adapted to extreme temperatures in excess of 140 degrees Fahrenheit surface temperature. That's, I believe, 60 degrees centigrade. Moving on, this species also spends 90 to 95% of their lifespan underground, seeking shelter both in the summer and winter months. The Mojave population of the desert tortoise recently received protection under the Endangered Species Act here in the U.S. So this is a federal listing as threatened, which occurred in 1994. And this was due to documented declines across their range at permanent study sites. These declines are related to a whole host of features or factors, such as disease, predation, massive habitat loss, habitat alteration from fire, and plant forage composition change, which we will get into in a little bit. And these all contribute to challenge the species as a whole, and especially the recovery of the species. So we conducted our study 20 miles roughly north of Las Vegas, Nevada, in southern Utah, or southern Nevada. Our study area was burned in 2005, June 2005, by lightning sparked wildfires, which burned a considerable portion of designated critical tortoise habitat, and even more area that was designated as suitable habitat for the desert tortoise. We began monitoring, the USGS began monitoring tortoises post-fire in 2006, and has been exploring the use of deployable GPS data loggers since 2009. Over here to the right of the slide, you can see In orange here we have orange-brown. We have our derived burned habitat layer at our study site, and in sort of light pink red we have the home range coverage. So this is an approximation of the habitat that our animals are currently utilizing. And you can see here that we have two population clusters, one to the north of our study area, and then a larger one to the south. Primarily animals living on the perimeter of burned habitat. We are primarily interested in the differences between the two habitat types in terms of the shelter availability and the quality of shelter due to the loss of plants in the fire area, and also looking at the change in forage composition between the two habitat types. So the purpose of monitoring animals on a more frequent basis here is to get a better image of the habitat they're actually utilizing and also the timing of that usage. So getting into our methods here, we deployed these GPS data loggers, which are able to record animal location much more frequently than is available with more traditional radio tracking and telemetry methods. And these methods also minimize any human-related disturbance and the possible alterations of natural behavior due to that disturbance. And you can see on the upper right-hand corner here we have an animal with a GPS data logger being downloaded in the field. This was done early on just to check the functionality of our loggers. In 2011, we programmed our loggers to record 34 times each day between 4 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. So this equated to every 30 minutes on either the hour or the half hour. And this was performed every other day. And the every other day was decided upon to extend our battery life on these units. We also, it was important to any study that uses GPS, you want to understand the accuracy and precision of your equipment. So we estimated the circular error that goes along with using these units in the shrub cover present at our study site. We estimated that for 50% of successful fixes, they have an accuracy under 4 meters, and for 95% of successful fixes, they are within 8 meters. So that was definitely a nice result there, a great level of precision that we're getting from these units. So results from this year. Between mid-April and mid-October, we were able to average about 1,200 locations recorded for 22 adult study tortoises. Not all animals were observed every day, but due to a variety of natural and natural and artificial factors. But we were able to get a very nice data set on 22 study animals. So from here we'll move on to GeoTime for the next section of the presentation. Okay, so here you see that same study area map you were looking at prior. In light brown here you see our burned habitat layer. Gray is just our digital elevation model, and and these are roads, obviously. Our study population, you can see the split between our northern and southern groups here that live on the edges of the burned habitat. So zooming in here, so here we can see a blow-up of the southern group, and you can see a cluster of animals over the course of the season. Off to the left-hand side of the screen here, we see an animal that made very unusual movements, at least for our study population. This animal was actually lost for a period of time up here in the blue, and we found it again and attached a GPS logger and or well, we had a malfunctioning GPS logger actually, and we attached it in mid-June, and we see here this animal stayed put for at least a couple weeks after we attached the transmitter or the GPS logger. And then in actually about July 31st, this animal took off and made about a 2.4 kilometer movement in 2.5 days in August, or the beginning of August, July-August, which is one of our at least our hottest period of the summer. So that was definitely an interesting movement for us. Moving on, we see another period of rest here going on from mid-August until about September. And then in mid-September, we see this animal take off again and traverse 21 kilometers in about 38 days. So this was quite a large movement for this animal, and it seemed that there wasn't much settling to his movements at all. And then we see here at the end, this animal makes a large movement and then returns to its previous home range or its previous area of habitat use. So moving on to our next behavior example, we're going to look at a female that resides in both burned and unburned habitats. As we can see here, this animal is using both habitats, making movements in and out of the burned area. If we zoom in on May here, we can see that this animal is using cover sites, burrows or shrubs or some sort of thermal shelter on both sides of the burned area, and then making large movements in between these cover sites. And cover sites are represented by these cluster of points where the animal was stationary for a period of time. If we zoom in on June, a little bit later, for the same animal, we can see that this animal starts to make some repeated movements, repeated trips into and out of the burned area, which is very interesting to us in terms of what we're trying to study here. So we can see a cover site within burned habitat, and then movement to cover sites out of burned habitat, and then we can see here a daily pattern of trips into and out of the burn. So this tortoise is using a cover site in the evenings that is out of the burn, and then making trips right up to the burn layer for a period of a couple weeks here. Does this repeated movement, and then all of a sudden moves to a cover site that is well within the unburned area. So getting to analyze these movements on a very fine scale in relation to environmental data, such as our burned habitat layer, is an incredible tool that GeoTime provides. Moving on here, we'll look at the movement from a male that covers quite a bit of ground. Males typically move larger, greater distances than do females. We can see here this animal made some very, very large movements across our study area. We can also see some seasonality to that movement. If we look at it from the side, we can see quite a bit of movement in the spring months up until about mid-June, and then we see the animal settling down for a period here. We can annotate, there we go. So we see the animal using a cover site here for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden emerging again and covering a bit of habitat. And what's interesting is this animal was using a cover site and frequenting the same location in unburned area in the spring months, and then once again in the fall months. But in the hottest period of the season, it stayed within the burned area at possibly a familiar cover site or a well-known cover site that it has used historically. Moving on to our next behavior example. This movement is from another male who uses habitat both in the burned area and in the unburned area. But here I was more interested by the linearity of this movement, and it looks like the majority of this movement tends to happen in this east-west direction. Off of, we see here our highway layer, and then we see this animal moving pretty much directly east-west repeatedly. And just from personal experience at this study site, there is actually a wash, which is usually provides a decent habitat for desert tortoise, and there's a wash here that runs almost directly east-west. So it seems that this animal is traversing this wash on a repeated basis throughout the season. Lastly, I'd like to look at what happened this summer for all of our animals. We had kind of an interesting anomaly, or a day when in midsummer, the transition from July to August, this actually occurred July 31st, we saw the majority of our animals take off and make large or reasonably large movements for midsummer. So we can see here, we see this blow up of the southern population group, and they're all relatively stable. They're not moving very much. We see one movement here a couple days prior, but for the most part, these animals are stationary. And then all of a sudden, July 31st hits, and we see a lot of motion, and we actually had quite a few meetings and link events occur on that day that we will get into a little later on. But as we can see here, these animals that were previously stationary, all of a sudden, all of them, or the majority of them, started to become active and move quite a bit on this day. And actually, if we look at our climate data and we look at the temperature, on this day we saw a dramatic fall in the peak surface temperature compared to days prior and then days afterwards. So we had an anomaly on this day in terms of temperature, and all of these animals started moving. So moving on down the line, we'll start to look at some of the errors that are just a result of any GPS tracking effort. You always will end up with some level of error due to calculation or satellite ephemeris data or something going on there. So we always end up with a few errors, and GeoTime is a great tool to be able to visually inspect those errors and make sure that what you're seeing it makes sense, and to make things simple. So here we have the movement from a female, and I've blown it up to a period where we saw a very abrupt movement that is just doesn't look right. So if we blow this up a little bit, we can see here that this animal was reasonably stationary during the morning of May 26th. And all of a sudden, in mid-afternoon, there's a large movement for some reason, or this GPS location has moved away from the progression of the rest of them. So we break this down, we can see that this was a 300-meter relocation from within 30 minutes from the previous location, and this equates to about 0.6, 0.7 kilometers per hour. And for the Mojave Desert Tortoise, this is definitely not a typical movement. So in this instance, it's fair to say that this point is most likely a GPS error, and the animal was actually somewhere in this vicinity during that error, and we would remove this from our data set as an outlier. So moving on to a similar example, here we see a similar instance where an animal was present in one location, and then the next day it was seen in the same location for a period, and then all of a sudden there's a 500-meter relocation within a half an hour logging interval. So this is definitely an error. Okay, so both of those errors that we just showed you were related to the GPS loggers themselves. Here we see an error related to human error or my error. Here we see, if we jump back, we can see the movement from one animal over the course of a season. And towards the end here, all of a sudden we see some very, very fast movement. And certainly from first glance, something isn't right here. So actually what occurred on this day and ended up in our data set was the logger was removed on the 18th of August, sometime in the morning, and then was carried around with the field biologist, in this case being myself, and carried around our study site in my backpack. Normally what we do is we try to shut these loggers off, but due to the fact that they have a magnetic switch and it's not the easiest thing to operate, sometimes these units can reactivate, and then they calculate positions for humans and not tortoises. So these sorts of outliers are certainly important to eliminate in our data set, and also the ability to visualize them is very helpful in determining what happened here. So moving on, we're going to look at some of the meetings that occurred between our study animals this season. I am entering a spatial and temporal tolerance of 17 hours and 15 meters. What this will do is it will give us the instances when at least two of our animals were within the same 15-meter space within the same day, or the same sampling day. So this doesn't necessarily mean that the two animals were within the same space at the same time. This just means they were using the same 15-meter habitat area within that same day at some point. So as you can see, we found 155 meetings between our animals, or at least between two tortoises. And if we view all the results, zoom in here, give my map data a second to recover there. If we zoom in, we can see that we have a clustering here. This is May till about July, when things get warm for us. And we can see a clustering, reasonable clustering of meetings here in the spring months, and then a bit of a gap. We did have some meetings in the southern group within this period, but for the most part we see a gap, and then a dense clustering of meetings occurring in our cooler fall months. So if we move on to GeoTime's network viewer, we can see here what it provides us is a nice representation of who's talking to who, or who is interacting with who, and to what degree. And we can see the interaction of our southern group here on the left, and then our smaller northern group on the right. And it's interesting to see that all animals did in fact speak with at least one other individual, except for our lonesome George here, who was separated from the rest of the population. And if we go to view this in 3 dimensions, and we blow up the window, and we view all of our link events, we can see here what I did was I manually entered all of our 155 or so link events into our data set, so that we can visualize the timing and the frequency of meetings between separate individuals. So you can see here there's a lot going on here, but each column is an individual tortoise in a different color, and then the fading arrows between individuals are the actual meeting events within our assigned proximity and time parameters. So you can certainly see that some individuals met more than others, and some met different times of the season, and this provides us an interesting way to visualize our connectivity among the population. So going back to the report, I will show you a few of our meetings just in depth, just try to break down the different potentials for meeting data and the different ways that they can be classified. In the world of the desert tortoise, there's a lot of talk about connectivity across the landscape, both in terms of genetic transfer and also the potential transfer of disease among individuals in the wild. So looking at meetings is a good way to actually assess connectivity across the landscape, and these GPS data loggers with a standardized sampling schedule provide a really nice means to look at some of this data. So if we zoom in here, we can see that these animals came in contact, or these two individuals here. We have CS54 in the light tan. That's a male. We have CS22 here in the light blue. That's a female. So here we have the potential for genetic transfer if these two animals, do come in within proximity of each other. And we can see here that these two animals did indeed come in contact with each other for 2 of our sampling intervals. They met our criteria, and then overall they met that criteria for a couple hours. So here we actually do have the potential for genetic transfer because these two animals were male and female and did come in contact with each other for at least a brief period of time. So moving on, we'll look at meetings between 2 males, and actually here we have the potential for another GPS error. We can see here that we have 2 males, one in light blue and one in purple, and they came in contact with each other at 2 separate instances. We can see here that there's a very sudden movement over to the habitat area of the adjacent male. This could be a GPS error. This might not be, but it is important to understand what's going on with your GPS data and not just trust it for what it is. So moving on, here we have another interesting meeting. This is with 3 tortoises, 3 individuals, occurring right on the perimeter of burned habitat. And here we can see 2 males. We have one in the dark red and the dark blue, and then we have a female in light blue. And what happened here was this female was present at this location, whether it be a burrow or a cover site or just out in the open. We have this female at this site early in the morning or earlier in the morning, and then she takes off, and 2 males arrive later in the afternoon at the exact same 15-meter location. So here we have the potential for disease transfer if the female was using a cover site and there was the potential for transfer to the 2 males, but we do not have the potential for any genetic transfer at this particular meeting. So those are a few examples of how we can break down this GPS data and look at the sexes and the timing of interaction to at least limit our implications of what could have occurred at that particular meeting. So here we'll jump back into PowerPoint, and we'll look at some of the results that came out of this sampling effort from this year. Some of this was derived using GeoTime, and some of it was derived using other statistical methods such as R. But at the top here we can see a monthly meeting count of meetings occurring in the burned and unburned habitat. What we did was we intersected our meeting locations with our derived burned habitat layer, and we classified every meeting based on its location, whether it be burned or unburned. And what was interesting to us was, overall we see at least in the majority of months we see more meetings occurring in the unburned area for the most part. But if you look at just our hottest months of July and August, and then stretching into September, we see proportionally more meetings occurring in the unburned habitat, which could mean that animals in the burned area are more thermally restricted to movement during those months, and they might not be as apt to move around. This was very interesting to our study, and will be interesting to see if we see these same patterns occurring in future seasons. Moving down to the middle graph, we can see here that this was average daily distance traveled for each individual, and then averaged across the population, and then averaged by month. We can see basically equal amounts of movement occurring both in the burned and unburned areas. We really didn't see any clear differences between the two habitat types, which was also an interesting result for us. Down here at the bottom, just to sum up, we did see some very, very significant differences between male and female movement occurring in the spring months of April, May, September, October, or the spring and fall months, excuse me. But then if you look at just our warmest months, June, July, August, the male movement does decrease quite a bit to approximately the level of female movement. So moving on to some of the future implications of GPS data loggers and visualization options such as GeoTime, and some of the areas that they might be useful in the future here, at least for the desert tortoise. Here in the deserts of the southwest United States, solar energy is developing very rapidly, and typically in the Mojave Desert, the best habitat for solar energy projects is also good habitat for the desert tortoise. So there is a bit of a clash there in terms of conservation, and then also providing renewable energy for America's future. Often this remaining habitat that solar installations are going into it represents habitat corridors for not only the desert tortoise but many other species out here. There's a lot of interest into the impacts that these installations and these developments might have on the landscape level genetic transfer among tortoises and among populations. So understanding the connectivity structure within these corridors is very important and may better guide decisions for the location of solar projects, and also the corresponding location of desert tortoise conservation areas. So obviously we would want to site these solar projects in areas that are low connectivity for the tortoise, and vice versa. We would want to establish conservation areas in areas of high connectivity, high gene flow, where the population is going to remain viable for some time. So just to sum up, GPS data loggers such as what we've been using, and the spatiotemporal visualization options such as GeoTime are very attractive tools for the analysis of movement and monitoring data, and then also to turn that movement data into a actual landscape level connectivity structure, if you could term it that, among populations on the ground. So from here I will turn things over to Curtis for questions and comments you may have, and I want to thank everybody for attending, and I also need to mention our funding from the U.S. Department of the Interior BLM, and I just want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for the great presentation. We'll now open things up for questions and comments.